If you want to know about why Mike was the one to stay back in Derry while his friends moved on without him, then stick around to the end of this video. This lesson is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Visit expressvpn.com/CZsWorld to learn how you can get 3 months free. Welcome to Horror History.
Who'd want a history of this toilet?
My name is Abraham Lincoln Taco Hunter, and this time I'm not the only horror historian of this episode because I'm covering Mike Hanlon. Mike was the 7th and final piece of the Losers Club, a researcher who used his knowledge to help guide his friends in the right direction to be able to understand and take down their supernatural rival. To understand why Mike became interested in cataloging the history of Derry, we'll have to dig into some history texts as well, starting with Mike's earliest days of infancy. Michael Hanlon became the only child of William and Jessica Hanlon in 1946 and was born into a life of farming. One day, when Mike was only a baby, the weather outside was nice, so Jessica took her son's crib outside so they could enjoy some sunshine, where baby Mike was attacked by a wild bird, which pecked at him until his mother shooed it away. This trauma somehow stuck with Mike into his older years, where he would continue to have a fear of birds. He grew up helping his father on the farm, which he was paid for, and received 5% stake in the business in order for Will to teach him the value of hard work. The work consisted of picking peas, radishes, beans, potatoes, pumpkins, and squash. In 1951, Mike began school at the Neibolt Church Street School, a religious institution that kept him from meeting many of the kids his age in town who attended Derry Elementary, leaving him to fill the time his father gave him off of work in the summers by himself. The Hanlons sometimes had trouble with their racist neighbor, Butch Bowers, and not long before the spring of 1958, Butch's son Henry joined in on the torment when he killed the Hanlons' dog, Mr. Chips, by feeding him a poisoned burger. It was at this point when Will felt it necessary to teach his son about some of the evil people that inhabit Derry, explaining that Butch was crazy and that he should stay away from Henry. He goes on to explain some of the inexplicable acts of racism throughout Derry's history. Will was somewhat of an amateur historian himself and kept a photo album that documented certain events from Derry's past. He used this to teach his son how to stay on guard, and I think this spiked Mike's interest in studying the past. Mike also learned how to drive the tractor from his father, and each year they would do a rock harvest. Although Mike enjoyed playing in the snow during the winter, he always felt a sadness when the harvest season came to an end. Will instilled a strong sense of morality into his son by giving him small tasks to teach him life lessons, or take him on day trips, like when he took his son to the police station to see the tramp chair, a restraining device used earlier in the century to punish wrongdoers. One day, Mike discovers a note from his father telling him to go check out the remains of the old ironworks that exploded in 1906, an activity meant to clue Mike in on the violent patterns of Derry's past. This was only one day after he had watched the movie Rodan with his dad, and when he arrived at the ruins, he discovered a giant bird hiding in the cellar hole. Mike ran, and the bird swooped in to try to pick him up, so he took refuge in the smokestack. The bird tried to squeeze into the enclosure with him, and Mike was only able to drive it away by throwing pieces of tile and getting some assistance from some unknown force helping him throw harder, likely its rival, the turtle. One of the pieces of tile pierces the bird, and it disappears. When Mike gets home, his father regrets telling him to go over there, without Mike even having shared what had happened. I think Will is somewhat privy to the effects of it that haunt Derry, and senses that the ironworks could be dangerous, even if he wasn't aware of the monster itself in the same way that Mike is. A couple of months later, in June, on the first day of summer vacation, Mike went over to Basie Park near the canal and smelled a salty old sea smell in the morning fog that gave him a sense of danger. He discovered a pocket knife with the initials EC in the grass, and he was going to take it for himself until he saw the blood. This makes him think of the bird from the ironworks, but he pushes that thought away. He follows a set of grooves in the grass, and they lead him to a bloody piece of cloth and dried blood at the canal's edge. He sees something move in the outflow tunnel, then hears a loud splash that causes him to throw the knife into the canal and run to his bike, but he could hear wet footsteps following him in the grass. He would later hear of the disappearance of a boy named Edward Corcoran, most likely connected to the blade he found with the letters EC. Mike was the biggest target of the town's most prominent bully, Henry Bowers. Well, I guess Ben was technically the biggest target, but Mike was Henry's favorite target because of the rivalry between their fathers. In July of 1958, Henry and his gang were targeting Mike on a regular basis. On July 3rd, they chased after him while he was on his way to a marching band rehearsal. Mike played the trombone, and this would be the last rehearsal before their Independence Day performance. The bullies chase him down to the abandoned property at 29 Neibolt Street, and Henry reveals that he was the one that killed Mike's dog, causing Mike to snap and throw a rock at Henry's forehead, causing it to bleed. He climbs over the fence to escape, but Henry catches his shoe as he does, so Mike kicks down and breaks Henry's nose. The chase continues into the gravel pit in the Barrens, where Mike fortunately runs into Bill Denbrough, Ben Hanscom, Beverly Marsh, Eddie Kasprak, Richie Tozier, and Stan Uris. An epic rock fight ensues, and the kids are able to drive away Henry's gang.
I think the 6 of us could put you in the hospital.
7.
That was the moment that Mike Hanlon joined the Losers Club, a name given to them by Henry Bowers himself. Mike could relate to these kids because just like he's bullied by Henry for his skin color, each of them have something that caused Henry and his gang to go after them. Bill had his stutter, Eddie his asthma, Ben his weight, Beverly her scandalous reputation, Richie his glasses, and Stan his Torah. The group got to know Mike, but they would not bring up their encounters with Pennywise just yet. And although the movies don't cover it, the next day Mike would have his first encounter with it in its favorite form. One of Mike Hanlon's greatest strengths was his ability to document everything that occurred in Derry to use against Pennywise. Now, when I'm surfing the web, I don't want someone like Mike documenting my activities online and using them against me. That's why I recommend ExpressVPN. A VPN is a virtual private network. If you're connected to an unencrypted internet network without a VPN, you're putting yourself in danger. Any hacker on the same network can steal your login details, credit card numbers, really any information that you send over that network. Don't go out much, you still need a VPN. In 2018, the FCC's new rules reversed net neutrality. So these internet service providers, who are at least 10 times more evil than Pennywise, can now sell all of your data to the highest bidder. But not if you have ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN encrypts all of your data and reroutes your connection to one of their servers, so that your ISP and hackers can't see what you're doing. Let me show you how to set it up. That's it. It also allows you to watch your favorite horror movies that might not be available in your country. For example, I can't watch this movie in my country, so ExpressVPN is going to tell the website that I'm in a different country. And now I can watch it. So take back your internet privacy today, because I'm giving you 3 months free by clicking the link in the description box. That's expressvpn.com/CZsWorld. Take back your privacy today with ExpressVPN. July 4th, American Independence Day. A day for barbecues, fireworks, parades, and an ancient evil creature that feeds off of children's fears. Okay, who created this holiday? As Mike was marching for the Neibolt Church Street School Band's annual parade, he noticed a clown handing out balloons to children on the side of the road, and got a feeling from the clown that reminded him of the giant bird. The clown made eye contact and waved at Mike, as if it had read his mind. Mike's trombone went silent as his mouth dried up at this sight. Somehow seeing the clown felt even worse than seeing Henry Bowers. Later on up the hill, he came across the clown again, and wondered how it was possible for it to have gotten past the marching band that quickly. This time, many of the children were crying, and once again, Pennywise waved to Mike. This is when he recognized the creature from Derry's deep past in his father's photo album. He would share this discovery with his friends 2 days later, and the kids would plan on how they could kill it for the first time. They also start construction on a clubhouse in the Barrens, and the following week, Mike would bring the photo album along to share what he knew with the others. This is basically Mike taking the role of chief historian of the Losers Club. Perhaps the most important part any of them would take on, as Mike would soon find out. He shows them Pennywise cameos in pictures dating back to the early 1700s. Then a 1945 photo comes to life, and Pennywise terrorizes them by morphing into its many scary forms, like the werewolf, leper, mummy, and dead boys. In late July, the Losers Club decides to try conducting a smoke hole ceremony, an Indian ritual used to help tribesmen make big decisions by breathing in a lot of smoke and having hallucinations of the best path forward. Do not try this at home, or you'll just die or get cancer. They start a bonfire in the clubhouse, and one by one, they jump out when it becomes too hard to breathe, leaving only Richie and Mike. They see the inside of the tiny clubhouse start to expand, leaving them in a huge space the size of a ballroom. Smoke clouds their vision, and they feel themselves start to float up until Mike realizes that they're no longer inside the confines of the clubhouse, but rather outside in the Barrens. Although these were not the Barrens as Richie and Mike knew them. These were the Barrens as they looked millions of years ago. No standpipe, no houses, but lots more animal wildlife such as bats, jumping fish, and antelope. The animals flee the area, and they feel as if they know what's about to happen. They can feel the presence of it drawing ever closer. A burning object pierces through the clouds, and Mike and Richie run for it. The next thing they know, they're being pulled out of the clubhouse and out of the hallucination by the others. Richie passes out, but upon coming back to, he and Mike tell the story about how they were able to view the arrival of it, crash landing from outer space. I find it most fitting that it was the group Seer and the Historian who were there to witness and pass on the story of this historical event. The plotting against it continues throughout the month. Mike joins the others in visiting Eddie Kasprak in the hospital after his arm is broken, and Mike again experiences the dirty prejudices that corrupt many citizens of Derry when Eddie's mom gives him an especially disdainful look while telling off the 6 of them. They go to the Barrens to take turns practicing with the slingshot to determine who would be the one to wield it against the monster. Mike holds the best record by hitting a respectable 5 out of 10 cans until Beverly came and slam dunked on all of them by hitting each of the 10. On July 23rd, the silver slugs that Beverly was to fire at Pennywise were created, and 2 days later, the 7 of them turned up to 29 Neibolt Street to confront it. Each of them perceived the house differently based on their own fears, and for Mike, it gives him the same vibes that he felt at the remains of the ironworks where he'd encountered the giant bird. The losers venture upstairs and come across 3 doors. The first contains a mattress that explodes and oozes out black liquid, so they shut that door and move on to the second. When Beverly gets close to it, she hears a scream coming from the other side, and it has a buzzing quality making it sound like a giant insect. Thanks to Mike's farming expertise, due to the many summers working for his father, he's able to determine that this is not a monster, but something known as a moose blower, a can that lets out a constant audible noise in order to scare crows away from the crops. The last door contains a dilapidated bathroom, where Beverly is able to use the slingshot to drive it down into the sewers, setting up the final confrontation of the summer that would take place a couple weeks later. On August 10th, Mike is riding his bike through town and notices a strange lack of activity and an ominous orange glow setting over the sky. Some of the only people that he bumps into are his friends. Bill is there with Stan, Richie, and Eddie. They cross over to the Barrens side of Kansas Street, where Ben and Beverly run up to them, going off about how Henry Bowers had come after her for her life. Bill determines that Henry and his goons are being driven by it and decides that it's time to go after the monster once more. They go into the Barrens and a rock flies out of the bushes and strikes Mike in the head. It had come from Henry, with his goons Belch and Victor. The move represents their revenge on Mike for running to the others and luring the bullies into the rock fight where they were badly bombarded with stones. Mike retaliates by throwing a piece of scrap wood back at them before the losers all escape to the sewers. The bullies came down into the sewers after them, and Mike felt trapped between his 2 worst demons as he heard Henry's screams echoing off the pipes as he continued to pursue them. Luckily for him, Henry would not catch up with him for another 27 years, but what awaited Mike deeper under Derry was worse than he could have ever imagined. First, he was restrained by the tentacles of a giant crawling eye creature that threatened to crush him where he stood and left him powerless to fight it. It was only Eddie's heroics that broke them free. The eye represented one of Richie's fears, but what would come was an incarnation of something Mike had long been afraid of. This is another detail that really cements Mike's position as the historian and also sets him apart from any of the others. When it takes the form of one of their fears, it's usually something recent that one of them saw and frightened them. For example, Richie sees a werewolf movie and it becomes a werewolf shortly after to scare him. One possible exception is Stan. The dead boys he sees in his solo encounter with it are from a news bite from many years ago. However, he only found out about it recently, so it's still more of a recent fear. But the other exception is Mike, whose fear goes way back to a time that he's hardly able to remember, the bird that attacked him in his crib as a baby. The next form that it takes is the giant bird, a form that shows Mike's eye for all things past and present. The bird dives in and scratches Eddie, and Mike retaliates by slashing his buck knife into its talons. He tries to fight back with the knife again, but misses and gets cut by the claws. Luckily, Stan is able to drive the creature away with his knowledge of birds, likely saving the lives of Eddie and Mike, if not all of them, and allowing them to continue on into the lair of it. After supporting Bill in his interdimensional mind battle with the monster, Mike and the others would escape the sewers and vow to take care of it again if it had somehow survived. Mike involuntarily takes the position that they would later refer to as manning the lighthouse. He stayed back in Derry to keep an eye out for signs of its return over the next 27 years. Mike was stuck with this because his family was the only one that did not move away, but it's also fitting that he be the one to stay for 2 reasons. First, the others lose their memories of the events of the summer of 1958 when they leave, and Mike must retain his memories because he is and always has been the bookkeeper. It's his responsibility to fill them in on the history of Derry and the history of their own quarrels with the monster when they return. Second, by staying in Derry, Mike is able to continue to research Derry's dark past and dig out the details necessary to combat it, should another confrontation be necessary. Before that happens though, Mike must face some of the toughest years of his life. In 1962, when Mike was 15 years old, his father was hospitalized with cancer. He would go and visit his dad every day on his bike, because even 4 years after the murders in Derry had ceased, his mother was still uncomfortable with him trying to hitch a ride. During one of these visits, Will told his son the last story he had yet to pass on, the story of the Black Spot Fire. In 1930, during Will's time in the army, he helped open up a nightclub that he and his friends would be welcome at. The jazz joint became pretty popular, and white troops started showing up there as well, until one night an evil organization set fire to the place. After narrowly escaping, Will looked up and saw the giant bird, not flapping its wings, but floating with a red balloon tied to each side. This event suggests that it has some kind of generational hold on both Hanlons, and gives Mike confirmation that the seemingly random acts of malice may all go back to the monster. Still, he couldn't have known if it would reawaken again, or if he and his friends had actually killed it in 58. So he continued to keep an eye out. His father would end up passing away that year, but he and his mom would stay in Derry, and Mike would continue his education at Derry High School, where he became the running back of the football team. The former Losers Club member didn't achieve the levels of success that his friends did when they grew up, something that Mike attributes to their triumph over its leading to success in other endeavors, but I think it's interesting to note that Mike was able to graduate from marching band trombonist to actually being on the field during the football games. All of them kind of moved up in the world after defeating it. At some point, Mike became the town librarian and started to conduct deeper research about the past of Derry. In 1979, he must have realized that he'd soon find out if it would be reawakening, because he subscribed to newspapers in the 6 cities his old friends now lived in order to keep tabs. It was around 1980 that he started to sense that it would in fact come back. He claims the voice of the turtle may have clued him in on this. Also in 1980, he begins to work on a book, Derry, an Unauthorized Town History by Michael Hanlon. He starts his research by talking to a former Derry librarian, a man by the name of Albert Carson. Carson discourages him from digging into Derry's past, suggesting that the facts that aren't recorded in Derry's history books may disturb him, but Mike continues to press, so Carson gives him a couple of leads. The man who poisoned his family in 1851, the hacked-up lumberjacks of 1879, and more gruesome details of the ironworks explosion that he already knew about. He also learns that there was a man named Branson Buttinger, who had tried to write a similar piece to what Mike is doing, but is essentially driven mad and died. Despite this, Mike finds the bravery to continue researching Derry, and becomes an important member of the community over the years. At some point in the 80s, the Aladdin Theater, where he and the Losers used to spend part of their summers, is in danger of being shut down, and Mike helped to call a town meeting to save it. Despite the noble act of saving a movie theater, I think getting involved in the business of Derry was actually a mistake, but I'll come back to why I think that in a little bit. Mike took note when the murders started up again in the year 1984, but didn't want to call the other Losers back to Derry until he was absolutely sure that it was back. He got really close to calling them in February of 1985 when the disappearances of Dennis Torrio and Lorianne Winterbarger took place. Mike started paying off one of the Derry police officers for more information and copies of evidence photos for his own documentation.
Chief's gonna have a cow when he sees you nosing around, Mike.
I won't tell him if you don't.
In March, he stays late at the library one night and finds a balloon tied to his reading lamp, with a photo of him attached. One drunken night in April, Mike reads about Claude Hero and the crimes that he committed in 1905. That night, he also gets the sense that it wants revenge for when the Losers nearly killed it as kids. Mike keeps on documenting the incidents that take place through May 22, when a 5th grader named Jerry Bellwood is found alongside the words "Come home" printed on a cement wall in blood. That ends up being the final straw before Mike calls his 6 childhood friends back to Derry. He sets up a reunion lunch near the recently built mall at a Chinese place called Jade of the Orient. His reason for choosing it is that it's new, and he probably knows better than anyone that it has a stranglehold on everything from Derry's past. Only 5 of them make it to the reunion, and Mike has to explain how Stan had passed away. He fills them in on everything I just said in the last 4 to 5 minutes of this video that I don't really care to repeat, and as the Losers spend more time back in Derry, their childhood scars start to come back, and Mike reveals the claw scars on his chest that he would have acquired against the giant bird in the sewers 27 years ago. Things start to get weird when they all get their fortune cookies, but they try to play it cool when the waitress comes by, as not to raise alarm. "So, who do you think's gonna win the pennant?" Bill asked Mike, smiling insanely. Rose came through the curtain just then, her face politely questioning. "I think the Chicago Bears look good," Mike said. "Oh, if only he had seen them on Monday Night Football this week against Washington. Khalil Mack, Danny Trevathan, haha Clinton pick 6. No, but the book takes place in 1985, which of course is the year that the Bears won the Super Bowl. The movie It Chapter 2 takes place in 2016, so it would have been an excellent opportunity to do the same scene but with a different answer. So, who do you think's gonna win the pennant? "I think the Chicago Cubs look good." Anyway, where even was I? Right, Mike Hanlon. They all go their separate ways and plan to meet at the library later, and during this downtime, Mike gets a call from Bill asking if he can store a bike that he just bought at Mike's shed. And Mike somehow knows right away that it's Bill's old bike Silver and says yes. They fix up the bikes together with a patch kit that Mike bought a week beforehand on an impulse, even though he doesn't even own a bike. This is more evidence that there was a helping hand at play this time. Just as the turtle had helped them in 1958, there was a different hand of fate guiding them as adults. Now, when Mike joined the group after the rock fight 27 years ago, he felt himself become the final piece. The wheel was complete, and it could begin to roll. And that's when they started making plans to fight Pennywise. The reason Mike had them walk around town and regain their memories was to see if they could close that wheel again. It would be smaller without Stan, but it was the only chance they had to defeat it. But that evening, Mike's plan would go horribly wrong. It was 11:15 a.m. after another meeting with the losers at the Derry Public Library when Mike advised them to all go back to the hotel and get some sleep. He decided to stay a bit longer and log the night's events in his journal, but he had a strange feeling that he wasn't alone in the library. 15 minutes later, he hears a footstep and approaches with a letter opener as his only defense. It was his old enemy, Henry Bowers, freed from the mental asylum that he'd been locked up in by It. Henry has his old blade back as well, and the two go at it. It eggs Henry on by taking the form of Stan's head and then later Belch's head on the library circulation desk and telling him to finish Mike off. Ultimately, Mike's letter opener is enough to fend him off though, and Henry flees the library thinking that Mike had lost enough blood to do him in, but pretty badly injured himself. Mike is barely able to make it to the phone to call 911. Pennywise messes with him in the process by taking over the telephone line that Mike is trying to talk on and replacing the clock face with the face of Will Hanlon. Police find Mike barely hanging on when they arrive and transfer him to the hospital, where it would make one more attempt on his life. The other five decided that the longer they waited to take on It, the more danger they were putting themselves in. For a long time, it seemed strange to me that the novel is told from Mike's perspective more than anyone else's, but he isn't there for the final confrontation. But on further examination, I think that's exactly the reason that he couldn't be there for the final fight. Remember earlier I mentioned Mike was getting involved in the community to save the theater? I think he basically acclimated himself to Derry. He stayed there and became a part of the town, and as we know, Pennywise rules all things Derry. He may have had good intentions, but he was really no more capable of stopping It than characters like Mr. Nell and Mr. Gaudreau. Mike stays the night in the hospital, and over the next 4 hours, a huge storm brews above Derry as his friends make their way towards the lair of It. At 6:46 a.m., Mike awakens with a bad feeling. It has possessed one of the nurses at the hospital, Mark LaMonica, the brother of one of the victims who was taken in 1958. He's planning on overdosing Mike with a loaded syringe, and Mike doesn't have the physical strength to stop him. At that moment, Bill and the others sense Mike is in danger. They join hands and telekinetically send some of their power to him, an instance of the Losers Club using the shine to aid their friend. But for some reason, when the losers sense that Mike is in danger, it always reminds me more of the destruction of Alderaan in Star Wars.
Are you alright? What's wrong?
I felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
Maybe we could draw some comparisons to the abilities held by the characters in King's writing and The Force, but that sounds like a fan fiction for another day. The power of his friends gives Mike the ability to pick up a bottle and crack it over LaMonica's head. Bill and Richie had the strength to continue on and defeat Pennywise, knowing that their friend Mike would be okay. Mike ended up spending the week in the hospital. On June 4th, Bill dropped by to bring him his manuscript, and he offered up his place to Bill and his wife, who was trying to recover from her encounter with its deadlights. They are all starting to lose their memories again, but this time Mike is losing his as well, because with Pennywise dead, there's no reason he needs to hold on to that trauma any longer. He also feels that with It gone, and Derry is dying as well, which ties nicely into my theory about Mike not joining in on the final battle because he had become an integral part of Derry. By June 11th, the day that Mike was discharged from the hospital, he had nearly completely forgotten everything about his group of friends from 1958. He tried writing everything down, the only logical approach he could take being the group's record keeper, but the words faded from the pages hours after he wrote them. Mike has grown tired of Derry, and likely moves on from it after the end of the novel, with him no longer needing to keep watch. But before he leaves, he makes one final dedication to the town that he spent so much of his life in. He commissions a memorial plaque at the site that the standpipe once stood before it was swept away in the terrible storm. To those lost in the storm, May 31, 1985, and to the children, all the children. Love, Bill, Ben, Bev, Eddie, Richie, Stan, Mike. The Losers Club. Even after moving on to a new life and finally forgetting about the best friends of his childhood, he would sometimes still encounter them in his dreams. If you want to hear my analysis of the other members of the Losers Club, click that playlist on the left, and there are a couple more coming soon, so if you don't want to miss out on those, make sure you subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week. Ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.